Glad you could join us again on Earthfile. Welcome to the program. I am Ayola Kasim. The United Nations Conference held last December in Lima approved building blocks of a Paris deal in 2015 amid warnings far tougher action will be needed. One issue that many of the negotiators had hoped to avoid at the talks was one that confronted them the most. Adaptation came out as the next phase of action if the fight against climate change is to be taken to the next level. But this, we learned, comes with a price tag.
And today I call on all countries to join us.
The path to a climate deal in Paris by the end of the year is littered with obstacles. Foremost amongst them is how to differentiate between what industrialized nations, led by the United States, would do to cut fossil fuel pollution and what commitments developing ones, such as India and Brazil, will take on.
Distinguished delegates,
envoys from some 190 countries who gathered in Lima last year took a step towards what will be the first deal binding all nations to limit greenhouse gases, while they sketched out what information countries must provide to back up pledges they will make before Paris. Those promises remain voluntary, and the rich-poor divide clearly remained.
Let me be clear. Globally, there are no permanent interests. There are no permanent friends. It's your own interest. You have to decide your own interest. What you talk about, you're talking about the BRICS countries. The BRICS countries, yes, they are moving towards industrialization. And that's one of the reasons that one of the things that came out of Lima is that every country must now to give an account. And that must be done by in the early part of 2015. And the Secretariat will now have to decide, put all these things together, and decide what will happen as a template to Lima. However, to Paris. However, what we have been able to achieve in Lima is that we have been able to have a template to start to talk. These are issues that we are going to look at. And the point you made is also part of that issue. But like I said, it's a question of interest. Can you ever imagine American president and the Chinese president meeting and agreeing to say, look, I put X amount into climate change fund. Now let us start to talk about the reduction of emission. Don't you see a changing pattern? So my point is this. There's no fixation in life.
The 1997 climate agreement, known as the Kyoto Protocol, was a top-down apportioning of legally binding targets. The top-down approach was among the reasons why the United States never ratified Kyoto, while Canada and Russia withdrew from the second commitment period of the protocol.
Can you talk a little bit about this?
Negotiators taking lessons from Kyoto and the 2009 Copenhagen Climate Summit's failure on top-down decisions leading to ambitious climate deal now took the pledge and review route by introducing nationally determined contributions, a bottom-up approach for a climate deal. The expectations preceding the Lima conference were high on a bottom-up and partly voluntary approach to an international climate deal in which national governments take center stage. Since 2014 has been globally recorded the warmest year for the past 135 years, 2015 could be the year of serious climate changes. 2015 is raising the big question of whether the world leaders will take serious measures to reduce global warming and gas emissions.
The Anglican Church made a request to Shell and BP to be more responsible, to reduce the footprint on climate. And that's big news. Where is the church? Should be here. Where are the judges? They should be here. There are still sectors of society that are not being invited, involved, or interested in participating in this debate. I think lots of good things are happening already. There is a tremendous number of institutions that are already working with a vision of landscape, of integration of institutions. But unless we bring synergies amongst these sectors, I think it'll be very difficult to to overcome barriers that still exist. And I just want to mention one of those barriers, the perverse incentives for fossil fuels.
Vorrei dire a ciascuno di loro.
One of the top religious leaders who are seeking changes is the Pope. Last May, the Vatican hosted a 5-day summit to look at whether humanity's dealings with nature were sustainable. This year, Pope Francis reportedly plans to issue an encyclical on climate change and human ecology to parishioners across the globe. About 1.2 billion people identify as Catholic, more than 2/3 of them in the developing world. The Pope's stance can be seen as part of his campaign to reduce poverty and reflects that climate change is projected to hit the poorest people in the developing world much harder than the wealthy. A new report by the United Nations Environment Programme states that the cost of helping developing nations adapt to rising temperatures could climb as high as $150 billion by 2025 and 2030. He says those figures could be needed even if greenhouse gas emissions cuts succeed in restricting temperature rise to 2 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial period average. The goal, which world leaders several years ago agreed was necessary to avoid potentially catastrophic effects on the planet.
The report is an initial estimate of the cost of adaptation, and one of the main conclusions is that the current estimates of $70 to $100 billion per year may be underestimated, and that by the years 2030, 2040, we may need 2 or 3 times the amount that has been estimated by the IPCC and the World Bank.
And deadly effects to many places around the world. This global system of our Earth is having really a high temperature. So when your child is sick with the temperature, you have to take all medication and, if necessary, bring to doctors. This is what we have to do now. If I compare with our human body conditions, we have to first lower the temperature as you will do to your children. There should be no temperature, first of all. That is what we are doing. That requires a massive and urgent and immediate action. We have to mobilize all financial resources. I was very much encouraged when I convened the summit meeting on September 23rd. There were many business leaders, world business leaders. They pledged at least $200 billion for green economic development as well as climate-friendly investment.
How do we communicate such a complex issue as the threats of climate change, for example? And unless we are able to engage the mother, the grandmother, and the grandchild into understanding what is happening today, we won't succeed, because this very small privileged group of individuals cannot engage the large majority, that silent majority that needs to get involved. We don't learn from experience. How do we share knowledge, not only on successes, but also on failures, in order not to repeat and duplicate failures or successes of the past, but learn from them in order to avoid or replicate them?
To drive home their point, climate experts created a scenario where there is no major new investments in adaptation. According to the analysis, climate change will cause world incomes to fall in the next 2 decades by 25% across the board, with everyone's income going down, from the poorest farm worker to the wealthiest real estate baron.
70% of agricultural production is derived from subsistence farming. Smallholder diversified agrisystems are much more resilient to climate change than large-scale industrialized agriculture. Yet, despite their contribution to feeding the world, these are the farmers with some of the least amount of support. Their post-harvest losses and yield gaps are high, which is why some of the hungriest people in the world are smallholder farmers. But malnourishment and hunger are not only caused by scarcity. They are caused by poverty, by social strife, by inequality, and by poor infrastructure. And this matters because unsustainable land use changes have been made in the name of feeding hungry people. Agriculture, forestry, and other land use accounts for 1/3 of direct global greenhouse gas emissions. And palm oil is the single largest driver of tropical deforestation. Palm oil is one of the 5 foods that we all eat now: palm oil, maize, rice, wheat, and soya. This is the new global standard diet. Biodiversity and ecosystem services underpin all our activities in all land use sectors, and we all depend on them. The segregations of functions within a landscape has curtailed any attempt at integrated land use planning and land use management. But from small communities to multinational corporations, protecting the natural wealth of our landscapes is a challenge calling for joint action and accountability.
As organic farmers, we would also like to highlight the need for more incentives for agroecological purposes and sustainable, especially organic methods of farming, which on the one hand create adaptation for the most vulnerable poor farmers and smallholders in arid and semi-arid regions, but at the same time mitigate climate change by sequestering carbon in the soil.